I stood on my balcony overlooking the Pacific Ocean, reading the legal documents that would change everything. My own parents were suing me for my $1.8 million oceanfront apartment, the home I'd worked 16-hour days to afford, the place where I'd finally found peace after years of feeling invisible in my own family. The papers shook in my hands as I read their claim. Property was acquired through misappropriation of family trust funds. Rightful ownership belongs to Jessica Martinez, not Sofia Martinez. But they had no idea what I'd discovered just 3 days earlier. See, when I received those legal papers, I didn't just find a lawsuit. I found evidence that made my blood run cold. Bank statements showing transactions I never made, investment accounts opened in my name without my knowledge, and a paper trail of financial manipulation going back 15 years. My family had been systematically stealing from me while convincing me I was the problem child who never deserved anything good. I walked into that courtroom alone, carrying a briefcase full of evidence they thought I'd never find. My parents sat behind my sister Jessica, both wearing expressions of righteous indignation, ready to paint me as the ungrateful daughter who stole what belonged to her more deserving sister. They thought I'd crumble under pressure, hand over my apartment, and disappear quietly like I always had before. They had no idea that someone had been watching them for years, documenting everything, waiting for the moment when justice could finally be served. And when that person stood up in the courtroom and revealed what they knew, my family's faces went white with terror. What came next didn't just destroy their lawsuit. It exposed a conspiracy so twisted that even I didn't see it coming. And this is only the beginning. My name is Sofia Martinez. I'm 38 years old, and for the past 12 years, I've built a successful career as a digital marketing consultant, helping tech startups grow from nothing into million-dollar companies. I bought my oceanfront apartment in Santa Monica 3 years ago with money I earned entirely through my own effort, sleeping in my office for months, surviving on ramen and determination, working while others partied. I thought I'd finally made it. I thought I'd finally proven I was worth something to my family. I was wrong about what that would cost me. The morning the lawsuit arrived, I was sitting on my balcony with my morning coffee, watching surfers catch waves in the early dawn light. My apartment building was one of those glass towers that seemed to rise directly from the sand, each unit designed to maximize the ocean view that had become my daily source of peace and motivation. The doorbell rang at exactly 7:30 a.m. A process server stood there with a manila envelope thick enough to contain a book. He asked if I was Sofia Elena Martinez, handed me the papers, and walked away before I could process what was happening. My hands trembled as I tore open the seal. The first page hit me like a physical blow. Martinez v. Martinez. My own parents were suing me, claiming I'd purchased my apartment with money that rightfully belonged to my younger sister Jessica. The accusations were laid out in clinical legal language that made my stomach churn. Fraudulent appropriation of family assets, breach of fiduciary duty, unjust enrichment. According to the lawsuit, my apartment wasn't actually mine at all. They claimed I'd manipulated our elderly grandmother into giving me money, that I'd stolen from a family investment account, that I'd defrauded Jessica out of her rightful inheritance. None of it was true, not a single word. But the documentation was extensive, professional, clearly prepared by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Then I saw the witness statements. 8 signatures, 8 names I recognized immediately. Rosa Guerrero from the building next door, who used to invite me to her family barbecues. Miguel Santos, the owner of the corner market where I bought groceries every week. The Hernandez family, who'd congratulated me when I moved in, saying they were proud to have such a hard-working young woman in the neighborhood. All of them had signed affidavits claiming I'd exhibited suspicious behavior, that I'd bragged about getting money from the old woman, that I'd made threats about what would happen to family members who got in my way. I read their statements with growing horror. These were people I'd shared meals with, people who'd welcomed me into their community. Rosa had taught me her recipe for mole, and Miguel always saved the best produce for me. How could they turn against me so completely? I sank into my couch, legal papers scattered around me like evidence of a crime I didn't commit. This lawsuit wasn't hastily thrown together. This was calculated, methodical, the product of months or maybe years of planning. Someone had been building a case against me while I'd been living my life, completely unaware that my own family was constructing an elaborate trap. How long had they been watching me, documenting my life, preparing to tear it all down? Buried in the stack of papers was something that made my blood run cold. It was a photograph, color-printed, but slightly faded, showing me standing next to an elderly woman I didn't recognize. We were both smiling, standing in front of what looked like a bank. Written across the bottom in handwriting that looked like mine but couldn't be was, "Thank you for everything, Abuela. Sofia, 2019. I stared at that photo for a full minute. I had no memory of this picture being taken. I'd never been to a bank with any elderly relative other than my grandmother, and she'd been in a wheelchair for the last 5 years of her life. The woman in the photo was standing, healthy, and I'd never seen her before in my life, but the photo looked real. The lighting was right. The angle seemed authentic. My clothes looked like something I'd actually wear. Either I'd completely blocked out a memory, which seemed impossible, or someone had created this evidence with disturbing sophistication. If they could fabricate a photograph this convincing, what else had they manufactured? What other pieces of my own history had been rewritten to fit their narrative? I was still staring at the photo when there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find a man in an expensive navy suit, his gray hair perfectly styled, his expression cold and professional. He introduced himself as Richard Valdez, attorney for the Martinez family. The way he said, "the Martinez family," made it clear I wasn't included in that designation. He handed me another envelope, this one sealed with red tape. "This contains the evidence of your debt to your family, Ms. Martinez," he said, his tone suggesting he'd already judged and convicted me. "Cooperate with us, and this can be handled discreetly. Refuse, and things will become very unpleasant for you." My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Inside were dozens of documents, bank transfer records, loan agreements, investment account statements. Every single one bore my name and signature. Every single one detailed money I'd supposedly borrowed from family accounts over the past 10 years. The amounts added up to $400,000. I'd never seen any of these documents before. I'd never borrowed money from my family. After I turned 18, I'd made it a point of pride to never ask them for anything, knowing they'd either refuse or hold it over my head forever. Yet here was a paper trail spanning more than a decade, each transaction carefully dated and documented, creating an irrefutable history of debt I knew nothing about. Richard watched me with that same cold smile, clearly enjoying my shock. "Your parents have been very patient," he said. "But patience has its limits. The apartment should go to Jessica, who actually deserves it. You can make this easy, or you can make it hard. Either way, the outcome will be the same." I wanted to scream at him, to throw him out of my apartment, to tear up those fake documents and burn them. But I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up, my mind spinning with the implications of what I was seeing. This wasn't just a lawsuit. This was a coordinated attack, planned and executed with precision. My family had been building a case against me for years, creating evidence, manufacturing debt, waiting for the right moment to strike. I finally found my voice. "These aren't real," I managed to say. "I never borrowed this money. I never signed these documents." Richard's smile widened. "That's what they all say. See you in court, Ms. Martinez." He turned and walked down my hallway. And that's when I saw them. My parents stood beside a black Mercedes parked outside my building, both of them watching my apartment with expressions I'd seen my whole life. The look that said I was a disappointment, a problem to be solved, an obstacle in the way of what they really wanted. My mother, Carmen's arms were crossed, her mouth set in that familiar line of disapproval. My father, Diego, just looked tired, like dealing with me was an exhausting chore he wished he could delegate to someone else. And behind them, leaning against the car with a confidence that made my stomach turn, was the last person I'd expected to see. My sister Jessica smiled at me from across the street, and even from this distance, I could see the triumph in her eyes. The courtroom was already packed when I arrived 3 weeks later, my stomach churning with anxiety and anger in equal measure. I'd spent those weeks drowning in legal research, interviewing attorneys I couldn't afford, and lying awake at night, trying to understand how my own family could orchestrate something this cruel. I'd decided to represent myself, partly because good lawyers cost money I needed to protect, and partly because I refused to show weakness by admitting I needed help. Pride, my therapist would later tell me, isn't always your friend. But that morning, pride was all I had left. I took my seat at the defendant's table, my hands clasped tightly to stop them from shaking. The courtroom smelled like old leather and anxiety, that peculiar scent of a place where people's lives get decided by strangers. I was arranging my folders when I heard the door open behind me. The energy in the room shifted immediately. People turned to look. Someone gasped softly. I didn't need to turn around to know who had just walked in. Jessica made her entrance like an actress taking the stage on opening night. She moved slowly, carefully, one hand pressed against her lower back as if every step caused pain. She wore a conservative black dress that made her look serious and professional. Her long dark hair pulled back in a neat bun that suggested restraint and dignity. Everything about her presentation screamed, suffering daughter forced to take legal action against an exploitative sister. The spectators in the gallery watched her with obvious sympathy, some whispering to each other, their expressions a mixture of concern and curiosity. I watched Jessica's performance with the weary recognition of someone who'd seen this show too many times before. Jessica had always been brilliant at playing whatever role would get her the most attention and sympathy. When we were children, she'd perfected the art of crying on command, of making herself seem fragile and in need of protection, while I was painted as the aggressive, selfish one. Today's role was just a more sophisticated version of the same performance. Wounded sister, betrayed family member, reluctant plaintiff forced to take legal action against someone she'd rather forgive. The courtroom observers didn't know any of this. They saw what Jessica wanted them to see. A young woman suffering, struggling, showing courage in the face of family betrayal. An elderly woman in the second row actually reached out to touch Jessica's arm as she passed, murmuring something sympathetic. Jessica gave her a brave, trembling smile that belonged in a telenovela. I felt sick watching it, knowing that every gesture was calculated, that Jessica had probably practiced that exact expression in the mirror before coming here. Jessica reached the plaintiff's table and carefully lowered herself into the chair, wincing slightly as if the movement hurt. That's when I saw what she was carrying, and my breath caught in my throat. In Jessica's hands was a small wooden jewelry box, antique and carefully maintained, with delicate silver hinges and intricate carved flowers on the lid. I recognized it immediately. I would have recognized it anywhere. It was our grandmother's jewelry box. Our grandmother had died 8 years ago, and that box had been one of the few physical objects I'd wanted to keep. It was where she'd stored her few precious pieces, her wedding ring, a pearl necklace from her own mother, earrings she'd worn to church every Sunday. After she died, I'd asked my mother about the box. She'd told me it was lost, probably stolen during the estate clearing by one of the workers. I'd grieved for that box almost as much as for my grandmother herself. It was a connection to the only person in my family who'd ever made me feel truly loved. And now Jessica had it. She placed it on the table in front of her with deliberate care, adjusting its position so it sat perfectly centered, impossible to miss. She didn't open it. She didn't even look at it after setting it down. She just let it sit there, a silent presence that screamed with meaning I didn't yet understand. My chest tightened. My grandmother had loved me. She told me so repeatedly, in Spanish and English, in ways that couldn't be misunderstood. Whatever was in that box, whatever reason Jessica had for bringing it here, it couldn't change that truth, could it? But doubt crept in anyway, cold and insidious. Why else would Jessica bring it? What was inside? What secrets had my family kept hidden, waiting for this exact moment to reveal them? I wanted to leap across the aisle and grab that box, to open it myself and face whatever evidence or lies waited inside. But I forced myself to stay seated, to breathe slowly, to maintain the appearance of calm, even though my heart was hammering against my ribs. Jessica knew I'd seen the box. I caught the tiny flicker of satisfaction that crossed her face before she rearranged her features back into an expression of sorrowful dignity. This was psychological warfare, and she'd just landed a direct hit. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Patricia Ramirez entered. She was a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She settled into her seat and reviewed the case documents while we all waited in tense silence. Finally, she looked up and asked the plaintiff's attorney to make an opening statement. Richard Valdez stood, straightening his already perfect tie, and began his presentation. But before he could get far, Jessica raised her hand slightly, a delicate gesture requesting permission to speak. "Your Honor," she said, and her voice was exactly what I'd expected. Soft, trembling, barely holding back emotion. "May I address the court directly? This is very personal, and I feel I should explain in my own words." Judge Ramirez looked surprised but nodded. "Proceed, Ms. Martinez." Jessica stood slowly, supporting herself on the table as if she needed the stability. She took a shaky breath that carried perfectly to every corner of the quiet courtroom. "I didn't want to sue my own sister," she began, and I had to hand it to her. She sounded absolutely sincere. "Family is everything to me. It always has been. But our grandmother is gone, and before she died, she entrusted certain things to our family, things that were meant to help all of us, not just one person." She paused, pressing her hand to her chest, as if the words themselves caused her physical pain. Several people in the gallery leaned forward, completely absorbed in her story. Sofia took advantage of Abuela's confusion in her final months. Jessica continued, her voice breaking slightly. "She convinced our grandmother to give her money, told her lies about me and our parents, made Abuela believe that Sofia was the only one who cared about her. It's heartbreaking to admit, but my sister manipulated a dying woman. That was a lie. Our grandmother had been sharp until the very end. She'd never been confused, never shown signs of dementia or manipulation. She'd been in pain, yes, but her mind had remained clear. I'd spent countless hours with her in her final months, and she'd spoken lucidly about her life, her memories, her hopes for our family. But I couldn't say any of that. Not yet. My attorney, well, I was my attorney, had to follow the rules and wait for the proper moment to present my case. "I'm not here for money," Jessica said, and now there were actual tears sliding down her cheeks. "I'm here because what Sofia did was wrong. She took advantage of someone who trusted her, someone who loved her unconditionally. And now she's living in luxury while the rest of us struggle to pay for Abuela's medical bills that are still outstanding." More lies. Our grandmother's medical expenses had been covered by insurance and Medicare. There were no outstanding bills. But Jessica delivered this fiction with such conviction that I could see people in the gallery nodding along, their faces showing sympathy and outrage on her behalf. She looked directly at me then, her eyes filled with a perfect mixture of sadness and disappointed love. "Sofia, if you're listening, it's not too late. We can still fix this. Just do the right thing." The courtroom was absolutely silent. I could feel the weight of everyone's judgment pressing down on me. They'd bought her performance completely. Why wouldn't they? She was beautiful, articulate, apparently in pain, and pleading for justice for a deceased grandmother. I was the villain in this story, the opportunistic sister who'd exploited a dying woman for financial gain. Several people in the gallery were nodding along with Jessica's words. One elderly man in the back looked at me with open disgust. Behind Jessica, my parents stood near the courtroom doors. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her shoulders shaking with what appeared to be quiet sobs. My father had his arm around her, his face drawn and aged, eyes red-rimmed as if he'd been crying all morning. But I was close enough to see what the rest of the courtroom couldn't. There were no actual tears on my mother's face. The tissue she held was dry. My father's eyes were red, yes, but not from crying. Probably from the eye drops they'd used to create that effect. They were performers just like Jessica. The only difference was that Jessica had natural talent while my parents relied on props and preparation. I'd been cast as the villain in their carefully scripted drama, and they'd made sure every detail supported their narrative. The suffering grandmother, exploited in her final moments. The innocent sister, cheated out of her rightful inheritance. The elderly parents, devastated by one daughter's betrayal of the other. It was almost impressive in its completeness. They'd thought of everything. Judge Ramirez was watching me, her expression neutral, but something in her eyes suggested she wasn't entirely convinced by the performance she'd just witnessed. That gave me a tiny spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone would see through the lies. Jessica sat back down carefully, slowly, milking every moment of her victim portrayal. She placed her hand gently on top of our grandmother's jewelry box, a gesture that made my stomach clench with protective fury. That box wasn't hers. It had never been hers. And whatever she planned to do with it, whatever secrets or lies she thought it contained, I would fight her for the truth. Richard Valdez cleared his throat, drawing attention back to himself. Your Honor, my client's heartfelt statement illustrates exactly why we're here today. But words alone cannot convey the full scope of what we're dealing with. We have extensive documentation proving Ms. Sofia Martinez's systematic exploitation of her family's trust and resources. He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a folder. As he opened it and began removing documents, I felt ice settle in my veins. I'd seen that folder before, or one very much like it. It was the same type Richard had given me at my apartment, filled with loan agreements and bank statements I'd never seen before. But this time, as he laid papers on the table, one document caught my eye. It was older than the others. The paper slightly yellowed, and I could see handwriting on it. Handwriting that looked disturbingly familiar. Jessica smiled at me, a tiny expression that no one else could see. And then Richard lifted that particular document and held it up for the judge to examine. Your Honor, he said, his voice ringing with confidence. This is a promissory note signed by Sofia Martinez when she was 19 years old, acknowledging receipt of $75,000 from her grandmother and promising to repay it with interest. As you can see, the signature is authenticated, the date is clear, and the terms are explicit. My mind went blank with shock. I had never signed any promissory note. I'd never received $75,000 from my grandmother or anyone else. At 19, I'd been working 2 part-time jobs while attending community college, saving every penny I could because I knew my family wouldn't help me with education costs. That document was a lie. It had to be. But as the judge reached for it, as I saw my own signature scrolled across the bottom of a page I'd never seen before in my life, one terrible question echoed through my head. How was this possible? The promissory note felt like a punch to the gut, but I barely had time to process it before Richard reached back into his folder and withdrew another document. This one was different. It wasn't a formal legal paper or a bank statement. It was a letter, handwritten on cream-colored stationery that I recognized immediately, because I'd used that exact brand for years. My grandmother had given me a box of it for my 21st birthday, telling me that important thoughts deserved to be written by hand. Richard held the letter up so the judge could see it clearly, then began to read aloud. Dear Mama y Papa, I'm sorry for taking money from Abuela without telling you. I know it was wrong, but I needed it for the apartment down payment. I promise to pay everything back when my business takes off. Please don't be angry with Abuela. She was just trying to help me. Love, Sofia. Dated February 2021. The courtroom was absolutely silent. I stared at that letter, my mind refusing to accept what I was seeing. The handwriting looked exactly like mine. Not similar, not close. Exactly like mine. I could see from where I sat the way the capital S in Sophia had that distinctive loop at the top. The way my lowercase a always slanted slightly to the right. Even the way I dotted my I's with small circles instead of simple dots. Every quirk of my penmanship was replicated perfectly on that page. But I had never written those words. I had never taken money from my grandmother without my parents' knowledge, because there had been no secret money to take. And in February 2021, I'd been in the process of saving for my apartment down payment. Yes, but I'd been celebrating my independence, not confessing to theft. I would never have written a letter confessing to something I didn't do. The whole thing was impossible, except it was right there in front of me, looking more real than anything I could have invented. Richard handed the letter to Judge Ramirez, who examined it carefully, her reading glasses perched on her nose. Then he pulled out yet another document. Your Honor, we anticipated that Ms. Martinez might dispute the authenticity of this evidence. We've had it examined by a certified forensic handwriting analyst. He presented the report with a flourish. As you'll see, The expert confirms this is authentic handwriting, not a photocopy or digital reproduction. The ink is consistent with a standard ballpoint pen. The pressure variations are natural, and the letter was written by the same hand that signed the defendant's driver's license and other legal documents. The judge read the expert's report slowly. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This couldn't be happening. The expert was wrong. They had to be wrong. But as I watched the judge's face, I saw her expression shift from neutral interest to something more concerned. She looked up at me, her sharp eyes assessing, and I realized with growing horror that she was starting to believe the evidence. Why wouldn't she? A certified expert had just confirmed the letter was authentic. To her, this looked like a daughter caught in her own lies, desperately denying the obvious truth. I tried to focus, to think clearly through the panic that was threatening to overwhelm me. How was this possible? The handwriting expert wasn't lying about the letter being handwritten rather than printed. That meant someone had actually written those words in my handwriting, replicating every detail so perfectly that even a trained professional couldn't tell the difference. I looked at the letter again, forcing myself to study it objectively. There was even a tiny smudge of ink near the bottom right corner, exactly where my hand would rest when I wrote, exactly where I always accidentally smeared the ink before it dried completely. Someone had thought of everything. Then, like a light switching on in a dark room, I understood. My mind raced backward through time, pulling up memories I'd buried because they'd seemed too painful and pointless to dwell on. When I was 17, my parents had instituted a new house rule. Every time I did something wrong, no matter how minor, I had to write a letter of apology. Not just a verbal sorry, but a formal written letter explaining what I'd done wrong and how I'd do better. I'd thought it was excessive and humiliating, but I'd complied because refusing meant worse consequences. I remembered sitting at the kitchen table writing letter after letter. I'm sorry for leaving my textbooks on the dining room table. I'm sorry for forgetting to lock the back door. I'm sorry for coming home 15 minutes late. I'm sorry for talking back when you corrected me. My parents would read each letter carefully, sometimes making me rewrite them if they weren't apologetic enough. Then they'd file them away in a folder they kept in my father's study. "For your records," they'd said, "so you can look back and see your patterns of behavior." I'd written dozens of those letters, maybe hundreds, over the course of 3 years before I moved out for college. They'd had every sample they needed of my handwriting, every word, every letter of the alphabet written naturally under mild stress, so the pen pressure would vary authentically. They'd been collecting evidence, not for my records, for theirs. For this exact moment, 20 years in the future, when they'd need to prove I'd confessed to something I'd never done. The sophistication of it made me feel sick. They'd either hired someone with incredible skill to piece together a letter from my samples, or they'd used some kind of technology I didn't fully understand. Maybe both. However they'd done it, they'd created something that could fool experts, something that looked more real than real. This wasn't a plan hatched in anger a few months ago. This was a conspiracy that had been building since I was a teenager. Layers upon layers of manipulation and preparation, waiting for the moment when they'd need to destroy me completely. Judge Ramirez set down the handwriting analysis and looked directly at me. "Ms. Martinez, do you have anything to say about this letter?" I stood up, my legs shaking. My voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. "I never wrote that letter, Your Honor. I don't know how it was created, but those aren't my words. I never took money from my grandmother. I never apologized for buying my apartment because I had nothing to apologize for. That letter is fake." But even as I said it, I heard how weak it sounded. I had no proof. I had nothing but my word against physical evidence that had been verified by an expert. My parents stood behind Jessica, looking wounded and betrayed. My mother was shaking her head slowly, as if disappointed, but not surprised by my denial. Jessica dabbed at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief, the picture of a sister heartbroken by her siblings' lies. Richard Valdez's smile was subtle, but unmistakable. He knew he was winning. He could see the judge's skepticism, could feel the mood of the courtroom shifting further against me. I was the villain now, caught in my own deception, too arrogant or too foolish to just admit the truth and face the consequences. I sank back into my chair, my mind spinning. I needed evidence. I needed something concrete that could prove the letter was forged, that could expose my family's decades-long manipulation. But everything from my past had been either erased or twisted beyond recognition. They'd been so careful, so thorough. How could I fight ghosts? Then a memory surfaced, sharp and painful. There had been one person outside my family who'd watched me write, who'd sat beside me during those awful apology letter sessions and seen exactly how I formed my letters. Luna, my childhood friend, the daughter of our housekeeper, the only person who'd understood how wrong my family was. She used to sit with me at that kitchen table doing her homework while I wrote my endless apologies. She'd seen everything. She'd known everything. But Luna had disappeared 15 years ago. Or so I thought. I sat frozen in my chair as the judge conferred quietly with the bailiff about something procedural. The courtroom noise faded to a dull buzz in my ears. Luna's face appeared in my mind with startling clarity, as vivid as if I'd seen her yesterday instead of 15 years ago. She'd had dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders, eyes that sparkled with intelligence and warmth, and a smile that made you feel like you mattered. We'd been 10 years old, both of us existing on the margins of my family's world, but for very different reasons. Her mother cleaned our house twice a week, and Luna would come along during summer breaks, sitting in our garden while her mother worked inside. We'd spend hours together under the old jacaranda tree, drawing pictures and sketchbooks, making up stories about the clouds, sharing secrets the way only children can. Luna was the first person who ever made me feel like I wasn't invisible. She listened when I talked. She laughed at my jokes. She told me about her own dreams and fears. And she was the only person who saw how my family really treated me. The rest of the world saw the public version of the Martinez family, the respectable family that attended mass and hosted charity events. Luna saw what happened behind closed doors. I remembered one afternoon in particular, burned into my memory like a brand. I'd spilled juice on a white tablecloth while helping set up for one of my mother's dinner parties. A complete accident. But my mother had slapped me across the face hard enough to split my lip. I'd run outside to the garden, trying not to cry where anyone could see, and Luna had found me there. She'd held me while I sobbed, and when I finally calmed down enough to speak, she'd said something I didn't understand at the time. Your family isn't normal, Sophia. My mom says they hide terrible secrets. I don't understand what she means, but you need to be careful. I'd asked her what she meant, but she'd just shaken her head, looking scared. I'm not supposed to talk about it, but they're not good people. You deserve better than this. 10-year-old me had been confused and frightened by her words. How could my parents hide terrible secrets? They were just strict, I'd thought. Just disappointed in me for not being as good as Jessica. But Luna had been insistent, almost desperate. She'd made me promise to be careful, to pay attention, to remember that what was happening to me wasn't normal or deserved. Then, about a week before she disappeared, Luna had slipped me a note during one of our garden afternoons. It was tiny, folded into a small square, and she'd pressed it into my palm when no one was looking. Hide this, she'd whispered urgently. Read it when you're alone, and don't tell anyone I gave it to you. I'd waited until bedtime, then opened the note under my covers with a flashlight. The message was written in Luna's careful handwriting. Don't trust them. They will hurt you worse. I'm going to help you, but I need time. Be strong. I'd hidden the note in my favorite book, a copy of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, tucking it between pages in the middle where no one would accidentally find it. But a week later, the note was gone. I'd looked everywhere, tearing my room apart, convinced I'd just misplaced it. When I finally worked up the courage to ask my mother if she'd seen a piece of paper while cleaning my room, she'd given me a look of cold contempt. Stop making up stories, Sophia. Luna was a troublemaker and her mother was a thief. We fired them this morning. If you're looking for that girl's lies, I threw them in the trash where they belong. I'd been too shocked to argue, too young to understand what was really happening. Luna was gone. Her mother was gone. And I'd been left alone with my family. Ms. Martinez. Ms. Martinez. Someone was calling my name. I blinked, the memories releasing me reluctantly back into the present. Richard Valdez was staring at me with obvious irritation. Your Honor, the defendant appears to be ignoring these proceedings. Judge Ramirez looked at me with concern rather than annoyance. Ms. Martinez, are you all right? Do you need a moment? I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of the past. I'm sorry, Your Honor. I'm fine. Please continue. But I wasn't fine. The memories were still flooding back, each one a piece of a puzzle I was only now beginning to see clearly. Luna hadn't disappeared because her mother was fired for stealing. She'd been driven away because she'd known too much, because she'd been about to help me, because she'd seen the truth about my family, and they couldn't allow that truth to spread. More memories crashed over me like waves. I was 6 years old, wearing a dress that had been Jessica's 2 years earlier, stained and faded because new clothes were only for my sister, never for me. I was 8, watching my mother take the bicycle I'd gotten for my birthday and give it to the neighbor's daughter, explaining to the woman that Sophia doesn't take care of nice things, but your Maria will treasure it. I was 12, sitting alone at the kitchen table eating a sandwich for dinner while the rest of my family celebrated Jessica's quinceañera with catered food in the dining room. You can join us when you've learned to contribute something worth celebrating, my father had said. I remembered my grandmother's funeral most vividly of all. I'd spent the last 4 months of her life caring for her, sleeping on a cot in her room, helping her with medications, reading to her when she was too weak to hold a book herself. I'd been there when she took her last breath, holding her hand and telling her I loved her. But at the funeral, person after person approached Jessica, telling her what a devoted granddaughter she'd been, how much our grandmother must have appreciated her care. Jessica accepted their praise with graceful humility, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. No one looked at me standing in the corner. No one acknowledged that I'd been the one actually there day after day, night after night. I'd thought then, with the particular pain of an 18-year-old who should have known better, maybe I really don't deserve to be loved. But now I understood. It wasn't that I was unlovable. It was that my family had systematically trained me to believe I was worthless, had programmed me from childhood to accept being erased, to never fight back, to feel guilty for existing. Every punishment, every dismissal, every moment of calculated neglect had been part of a larger pattern of psychological conditioning. They'd been preparing me my whole life to be a victim, someone too broken to defend herself, when they finally decided to take everything I'd built. The realization was both horrifying and strangely liberating. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't remembering things wrong. This had been deliberate, sustained, methodical abuse spanning decades. Then another memory surfaced. This one so clear it felt like Luna was standing right beside me again. It was the last time I'd seen her, the morning before she and her mother disappeared. We'd been in the garden, and Luna had seemed agitated, frightened. She'd grabbed my hands and looked straight into my eyes. Your grandmother knows everything, she'd said urgently. Ask her about the blue notebook. She'll tell you the truth when you're ready. I'd started to ask what she meant, but Luna's mother had called for her, and she'd run off. I never saw her again. And in the chaos of her disappearance and my family's explanations, I'd forgotten those last words until now. Your grandmother knows everything. Ask her about the blue notebook. My grandmother had been dead for 8 years. Whatever she'd known, whatever secrets that blue notebook contained, they died with her. Or had they? I tried to pull my attention back to the courtroom, to focus on what was happening in the present, rather than drowning in the past. But the judge's voice cut through my scattered thoughts like a knife through fog. Mr. Martinez, Judge Ramirez said, and there was something new in her tone now, something sharp and questioning that made everyone in the courtroom sit up straighter. I'd like to return to something that's been troubling me. How exactly did you obtain your daughter's private financial documents? The bank statements, the account numbers, the transaction histories that your attorney has presented as evidence. My father stood up, smoothing down his tie in a gesture I recognized as his tell when he was about to lie. He'd done it my whole life, that little adjustment of his tie right before he told me something that wasn't true. Your Honor, Sophia left those documents at our home. We found them while cleaning out some old storage boxes. It was completely by accident. Judge Ramirez's eyebrows rose sharply. She removed her reading glasses and fixed my father with a look that could have frozen water. By accident? You accidentally found your adult daughter's current bank statements, her account numbers, her transaction histories from the past 10 years, all conveniently stored in boxes in your home. Her voice carried a skepticism that made my heart leap with hope. Mr. Martinez, are you aware that accessing someone's financial records without their explicit permission is a federal offense? That what you're describing could constitute identity theft? The courtroom erupted in whispers. My father's face went red, then white. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Richard Valdez jumped to his feet, his professional composure cracking slightly. Your Honor, my clients were simply trying to understand their daughter's financial situation in order to determine if their concerns about misappropriation were valid. They had no malicious intent. Judge Ramirez raised one hand, a simple gesture that nonetheless commanded immediate silence. Attorney Valdez, I did not ask you to speak. Please sit down. Her voice was ice. Richard sat, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the first signs that things weren't going according to his perfect script. The judge turned back to my father. Mr. Martinez, I'm still waiting for a clear explanation. How did you obtain documents that should have been impossible for you to access? My father looked desperately at my mother, at Jessica, at Richard, as if one of them could somehow save him from this question. But before anyone could help him, Jessica made a catastrophic mistake. She stood up, her hand pressed to her chest, her voice rising with panic. But we needed to check her bank accounts to prove she took family money. We had to know if she was lying to us. The words hung in the air, like an accusation she'd just made against herself. Judge Ramirez's attention snapped to Jessica, with the intensity of a hawk spotting prey. Ms. Jessica Martinez, did you just admit to accessing your sister's bank accounts without authorization? Jessica's face drained of all color. She seemed to realize, too late, what she'd just confessed to in open court. I didn't mean... We just needed to verify. How did you know her account numbers? The judge's voice was quiet now. Dangerously quiet. How did you access information that banks are legally required to keep confidential? Did you impersonate your sister? Did you hack into her accounts? Or did you use some other illegal method to obtain private financial information? The courtroom was dead silent. Every eye was fixed on Jessica, who looked like she might faint. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Behind her, my mother had gone rigid, her earlier performance of grief completely forgotten. My father had sunk back into his seat, his head in his hands. Even Richard Valdez looked shaken, probably realizing that his clients had just admitted to federal crimes while under oath in his presence. Whispers started rippling through the gallery, growing louder. I heard fragments of conversation. Did she just confess? They hacked her accounts. This is insane. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something other than despair. It was a tiny spark of hope, fragile as a candle flame in the wind. But it was there. Someone in authority was actually questioning my family's story. Someone was seeing through the perfect facade they'd constructed. Judge Ramirez was writing notes now, her pen moving rapidly across her legal pad. When she looked up, her expression had transformed from neutral judicial oversight to something much more serious. Attorney Valdez, your clients have just admitted to what appears to be illegal access of financial records and possible identity theft. I'm going to need satisfactory explanations before this case proceeds any further. Do you understand? Richard stood again, and this time his confidence was visibly shaken. Your Honor, I believe there may have been some miscommunication. My clients were simply concerned family members trying to understand their daughter's finances in order to determine if family resources had been misused. That's not what your client just said, Judge Ramirez replied coolly. She specifically stated they needed to check her bank accounts. That implies direct access, not accidentally finding old paperwork in a storage box. She turned her gaze to me, and the severity in her expression softened slightly. Ms. Martinez, I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. This isn't a trick question, and there's no wrong answer. I just need the truth. I stood on shaking legs, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Ramirez looked directly into my eyes, and in that moment, I felt truly seen for the first time in this entire ordeal. Have you ever felt safe in this family? The question broke something inside me that I'd been holding together through sheer force of will. Tears poured down my face before I could stop them. I tried to speak, to explain the decades of manipulation and abuse, the constant erosion of my self-worth, the feeling of always being one wrong move away from complete rejection. But no words would come. All I could do was shake my head over and over while tears streamed down my cheeks and my chest heaved with suppressed sobs. My parents shot to their feet simultaneously, my father's voice booming across the courtroom. Your Honor, this is completely inappropriate. You're leading our daughter, putting words in her mouth. Judge Ramirez's gavel came down with a crack that made everyone jump. Mr. Martinez, sit down and be silent, or I will have you removed from this courtroom. The authority in her voice was absolute. My father sat, but his face was purple with rage. The judge's attention came back to me, gentle again. Ms. Martinez, take your time. I know this is difficult. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, trying to compose myself enough to speak. No, Your Honor, I finally managed to whisper. I've never felt safe with them. Not once in my entire life. The judge nodded slowly, as if I'd just confirmed something she'd already suspected. She made more notes, and when she looked up again, she addressed the entire courtroom. We're going to take a 15-minute recess. When we return, I expect Attorney Valdez to provide detailed explanations about how his clients obtained the financial evidence they've presented. If those explanations are not satisfactory, this case is going to take a very different direction. She was about to strike her gavel again when a voice rang out from the back of the courtroom, clear and steady and completely unexpected. Your Honor, if I may, I have evidence that changes everything. Everyone turned to look. A woman was standing in the back row, someone I'd never seen before in my life. She looked to be in her mid-40s with dark hair streaked with silver and a kind face that carried an expression of determined courage. Judge Ramirez frowned. Ma'am, this is highly irregular. Who are you? The woman stepped forward into the aisle, and something about the way she moved, the determined set of her shoulders, sent a jolt of recognition through me, even though I was certain I'd never met her. My name is Luna Vasquez, Your Honor. I was the Martinez family's housekeeper's daughter from 1995 to 2005. She paused, her eyes finding mine across the courtroom, and when she spoke again, her voice was heavy with emotion. And I've been waiting 20 years to tell the truth about what they did to Sophia. The world seemed to stop spinning. Luna Vasquez. The words echoed in my head, refusing to make sense, even though I'd heard them clearly. Luna had been real. She hadn't been a figment of my childhood imagination, or a memory I'd distorted over time. She'd existed, and she was standing right here in this courtroom, looking at me with eyes that held the same kindness I remembered from her childhood. Judge Ramirez was speaking, but I barely heard her through the roaring in my ears. Something about procedures, about proper witness protocols. Then a younger man in a suit stepped forward from the same row where Luna had been sitting. Your Honor, my name is Carlos Rivera. I'm Ms. Vasquez's legal counsel. We formally request permission to present testimony and evidence relevant to this case. Ms. Vasquez has direct knowledge of financial improprieties committed by the Martinez family, and we believe this evidence is crucial to establishing the truth. The judge studied both Luna and her attorney for a long moment, her sharp eyes assessing. Finally, she nodded. Approach the bench. Luna and her attorney walked forward, and there was a brief, hushed conversation I couldn't hear. Richard Valdez was on his feet immediately, objecting, arguing about proper notice and witness lists, but Judge Ramirez cut him off with a look. Attorney Valdez, if this witness has relevant evidence about the financial documents you yourself have submitted, then I'm going to hear it. Objection overruled. Luna was sworn in and took the witness stand. Up close, I could see the resemblance to the child I'd known more clearly. She had the same gentle eyes, the same careful way of moving, as if she was always thinking 3 steps ahead. When she looked at me, her expression held such compassion that fresh tears spilled down my cheeks. I'd thought Luna and her family had simply moved away. that they'd forgotten about me the way everyone else had. But she'd been out there somewhere, carrying memories of her childhood friend and of the little girl she'd tried to protect. Ms.
Vasquez, Judge Ramirez said, please tell the court your connection to this case.
Luna took a deep breath.
Your Honor, my mother worked as the Martinez family's housekeeper from 1995 until 2005. I often came to work with her during school breaks, and I became very close friends with Sophia.
She glanced at me again. During those 10 years, while organizing the family's papers as part of my mother's duties, I discovered something deeply troubling. She paused, gathering her courage. The Martinezes had opened multiple bank accounts in Sophia's name when she was 16 years old. They were using her identity to take out personal loans, to hide income for tax purposes, and to create a financial paper trail that Sophia knew absolutely nothing about. The courtroom exploded in whispers. My father started to stand, but Richard grabbed his arm and pulled him back down. My mother's face had gone completely white. Luna continued, her voice steady and clear. I was only a child, but I understood that what they were doing was wrong. My mother tried to confront Mrs. Martinez about it. Do you know what Mrs. Martinez said? Luna's voice hardened. She said if we told anyone, if we went to the authorities, or even mentioned it to Sophia, she would report my mother for stealing jewelry from their home. She'd already prepared fake receipts, fake photographs, everything needed to send my mother to prison for a crime she didn't commit.
That's a lie.
My father's voice boomed across the courtroom.
Your Honor, this woman is making up stories to cover for her family's theft.
Judge Ramirez's gavel came down hard. Mr. Martinez, one more outburst and you will be removed. Ms. Vasquez, please continue. Luna nodded, her composure never wavering despite my father's attack. My mother hadn't stolen anything, but we knew the Martinezes could make it look real. They'd already shown us they were willing to commit fraud against their own daughter. What would they do to us? Her voice cracked slightly. So we did what we thought we had to do to protect ourselves. We left. We moved to another state. And I never forgave myself for leaving Sophia behind. She reached into a briefcase that her attorney handed to her and pulled out a USB drive. Your Honor, I've kept copies of every document I saw during those 10 years. This drive contains bank account records in Sophia's name dating from 2000 to 2005, emails between Mr. and Mrs. Martinez and various attorneys discussing strategies to use their daughter's name to avoid tax liability, and bank statements proving that the $400,000 debt they're claiming is completely fabricated. She looked directly at me. Sophia never borrowed that money. Her parents did, using her identity. Judge Ramirez took the USB drive, her expression grave. This evidence will need to be verified, but if what you're saying is true, Ms. Vasquez, we're no longer talking about a family property dispute. We're talking about identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy. She looked at my parents, and there was no sympathy in her gaze anymore. Mr. and Mrs. Martinez, you should know that if this evidence proves authentic, you could be facing criminal charges. My mother made a small sound, almost like a wounded animal. Jessica had sunk into her chair, the jewelry box suddenly looking ridiculous and theatrical against the weight of real evidence being presented. Richard Valdez was frantically whispering to my father, probably explaining just how serious this had become. Luna looked across the courtroom to where I sat, and she smiled at me, a gentle smile full of kindness and validation. I wanted you to know you were never alone, Sophia. Someone always believed you. Someone always knew the truth. I wanted to thank her, to tell her what her words meant to me, but I couldn't speak through my tears. I just nodded, hoping she could see the gratitude in my eyes. For the first time since this nightmare began, someone was fighting for me who didn't want anything in return. Someone was telling my truth when I'd been silenced for so long. Judge Ramirez was inserting the USB into her computer when Luna spoke again. Your Honor, there's one more file on that drive. Before you review the financial documents, I think you should listen to the audio recording. It's from 2004, and it explains everything. The judge clicked on the file, and a moment later, my father's voice filled the courtroom, preserved in crystal clarity from 20 years ago. And when the recording began to play, every single person in that room froze. The recording crackled with the slight static of an older audio file, but the voices came through with perfect clarity. I recognized my father's voice immediately, that practiced tone of casual authority he used when conducting business. The second voice was unfamiliar, professional, and polite, with the practiced patience of someone who dealt with complex financial transactions every day. Mr. Martinez, just to confirm the details, you want to purchase a life insurance policy on your daughter, Sophia Martinez, currently age 26. That's correct, my father's recorded voice said smoothly. $1. 5 million death benefit. And who will be listed as the beneficiary on this policy? There was a pause. Just a heartbeat of silence that seemed to stretch out forever in the hushed courtroom. Then my father spoke again, his tone so casual it made my skin crawl. My wife Carmen Martinez and my daughter Jessica Martinez split evenly between them. And has Ms. Sophia Martinez agreed to this policy? We'll need her signature and consent for a policy of this size. My father's laugh on the recording was light, almost dismissive. She doesn't need to know about it. She's young and healthy. Nothing's going to happen to her. This is just smart financial planning for the family. You can work around the signature requirement, can't you? I'm her father. Surely I'm allowed to take out insurance on my own children. The insurance agent's voice became slightly more cautious. Well, technically, Mr. Martinez, while parents can insure their minor children, adult children generally need to consent to policies taken out on them, especially for amounts this large. But if you're willing to sign an affidavit stating she's financially dependent on you, we can proceed through an alternative application process. Perfect. Draft whatever paperwork you need. I'll sign it today. Judge Ramirez stopped the recording. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, heavy with the weight of what we'd all just heard. My blood had turned to ice. My parents had taken out a $1.5 million life insurance policy on me without my knowledge. If I died, they would collect $1.5 million, split between my mother and Jessica. I wasn't the beneficiary of my own death benefit. I was just the commodity, the asset that became valuable only when I stopped existing. Luna's voice cut through the shocked silence, steady and clear. Your Honor, there's additional context that makes this even more disturbing. That policy contains a special accidental death clause. If Sophia dies before the age of 45 in any kind of accident, the payout doubles to $3 million. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, and exclamations filled the air. Judge Ramirez struck her gavel 3 times before order was restored. My mind was racing backward to a memory I'd tried hard to forget. I was 27 years old, driving home from a client meeting in the early evening. My car was only 3 years old, well-maintained, with no mechanical issues. I'd pressed the brake pedal as I approached a red light, and nothing happened. The pedal went straight to the floor with no resistance, no response. I'd felt pure terror as I careened toward the intersection, managing at the last second to swerve into a nearby parking lot and scrape along a concrete barrier until friction finally stopped me. The mechanic who'd examined my car afterward had been genuinely concerned. Ms. Martinez, I need to be honest with you. These brake lines look cut, not worn through naturally. See this edge here? That's a clean slice, not corrosion or age damage. Someone deliberately sabotaged your braking system. I'd reported it to the police as vandalism, but they'd found nothing. No suspects, no security footage, no leads. I'd convinced myself it was random, maybe someone with a grudge against my employer or just senseless violence. But what if it hadn't been random at all? Judge Ramirez's voice was cold as ice when she addressed my father. Mr. Martinez, why did you purchase a life insurance policy on your adult daughter without her knowledge or consent, naming yourself and your other daughter as beneficiaries? My father stood, attempting to arrange his features into an expression of wounded innocence, but his hands were shaking visibly. Your Honor, I was simply trying to protect my family. If something happened to Sophia, I wanted to ensure her mother and sister would be financially secure. It was an act of love and responsibility, not... The beneficiary isn't your daughter, Judge Ramirez interrupted sharply. If you wanted to protect Sophia, you would have made her the beneficiary of her own life insurance policy, or at minimum included her. Instead, you created a financial arrangement where you and your family profit from her death. That's not protection, Mr. Martinez. That's a financial incentive for harm. My mother's face had gone chalk white. Jessica was crying, but these weren't the calculated tears from earlier. These were tears of fear, the kind that came when you realized everything was collapsing. Richard Valdez shot to his feet, his professional composure completely shattered. Your Honor, these are outrageous implications. My clients have every legal right to make financial decisions. There's absolutely no evidence of intent to harm. Judge Ramirez's eyes were hard as stone. Attorney Valdez, you are on the edge of contempt. Sit down immediately. She turned to the bailiff. Contact the district attorney's office. I want a full criminal investigation opened into the Martinez family's financial activities. I also want the police to reopen the investigation into Sofia Martinez's car accident from 2013. The formal language couldn't disguise what she was really saying. My family might have tried to kill me for insurance money. The thought was so enormous, so impossible, and yet so terrifyingly logical that I felt dizzy. Everything I'd tried to rationalize about my family's treatment of me crumbled completely. They hadn't just been emotionally abusive. They'd turned me into a financial asset worth more dead than alive. Luna was still standing at the witness box, her expression grim with determination. Your Honor, there's something else. The insurance policy isn't the only thing still active. She paused, making sure every person in the courtroom was listening. There's one more account you need to know about, the one they're still using today. Luna pulled another document from her briefcase, and I could see it was a bank statement, recent enough that the paper was still crisp and white. Your Honor, the Martinez family opened a checking account in Sofia's name in 2000, when she was 16 years old. That account has remained active for the past 23 years. They've used it continuously to take out personal loans, open credit cards, and even register real estate investments, all without Sofia's knowledge or consent. The words hit me like physical blows. 23 years. They'd been using my identity for 23 years. Suddenly everything made sense. When I tried to buy my apartment 3 years ago, I'd been shocked to discover my credit score was in ruins. The mortgage broker had looked at me with barely concealed judgment, asking if I'd had problems with debt management or bankruptcy. I'd been confused and humiliated, insisting there must be a mistake, that I'd never missed a payment on anything in my life. We'd spent weeks sorting through credit reports, finding mysterious accounts I'd never opened, loans I'd never taken out, late payments and defaults I'd never made. I'd assumed it was identity theft by some random criminal, or bureaucratic errors that had somehow attached someone else's debts to my social security number. I'd spent thousands of dollars and countless hours trying to clean up my credit, disputing every fraudulent item, filing reports with credit agencies. And the whole time, it had been my own family systematically destroying my financial future while using my name to finance their own lives. This account has been used regularly, Luna continued, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was revealing. Loans for home improvements, credit cards for personal purchases, even a car loan in 2020. All in Sofia's name, all damaging her credit, all benefiting her family. She placed a bank statement on the judge's bench. This is from last month. As you can see, there was a withdrawal of $75,000 transferred directly into an account belonging to Jessica Martinez. The transaction note reads, "Personal debt repayment." My head snapped toward Jessica. She was staring at the table in front of her, gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles had gone white. You used my name to borrow $75,000. My voice came out louder than I'd intended, sharp with betrayal. Last month, while you were planning to sue me. Jessica wouldn't meet my eyes. She shook her head slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't understand. They made me do it. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice, I said, and the words felt like they were coming from somewhere deep inside me, from a part of myself that had finally learned to fight back. You chose to steal from me. You chose to lie. You chose to participate in destroying my life. Judge Ramirez's gavel came down. Ms. Martinez, please contain yourself. But there was something in her tone that wasn't quite a reprimand. It was more like understanding. She turned to her clerk. I want this account frozen immediately. Contact the bank and inform them this account is subject to criminal investigation. No withdrawals, no transfers, No activity of any kind until further notice. She looked at Richard Valdez. Attorney Valdez, I assume you're going to object? Richard stood, his face flushed red with anger or embarrassment or both. Your Honor, this is completely inappropriate. You're making decisions based on unverified evidence from a witness with questionable motives. My clients have rights. Your clients have been committing identity theft for over 2 decades, Judge Ramirez said coldly. One more outburst from you, Attorney Valdez, and you will be held in contempt of court. Sit down. Luna wasn't finished. She pulled out another set of documents, and my stomach clenched with dread at what might come next. Your Honor, there's one more thing in these account records that I believe the court needs to see. In 2019, there's a payment of $25,000 to a private investigation firm called Pacific Surveillance Services. The attached invoice describes the service provided. She handed papers to both the judge and to me. I read the invoice with growing horror. The private investigator had been paid to conduct comprehensive surveillance on me for a period of 8 months. The report attached to the invoice was chillingly detailed, my work schedule documented down to the minute, my gym membership and the days and times I typically worked out, the coffee shop I frequented and what time I usually went there, the names of my friends and colleagues, where they lived, where we met for dinner or drinks. My daily routines were laid out like a map, every movement tracked and recorded. There were even photographs, dozens of them, showing me going about my normal life, completely unaware I was being watched. I felt violated in a way I'd never experienced before. They hadn't just stolen my money or damaged my credit. They'd invaded every aspect of my privacy, tracked me like I was a criminal or a target, documented my life as if I was under investigation. The thought of a stranger following me, photographing me, recording my movements while my own family paid him to do it, made me feel physically sick. Judge Ramirez was reading the surveillance report, her expression growing darker with each page. When she finally looked up, her voice carried the full weight of judicial authority. This is no longer a property dispute. What I'm seeing here is systematic financial fraud, identity theft spanning decades, and stalking. This court is suspending all proceedings for 2 weeks while law enforcement conducts a full criminal investigation. She looked directly at my parents and Jessica. The Martinez family is hereby prohibited from contacting Sofia Martinez in any way. No phone calls, no emails, no in-person contact. You are also prohibited from accessing, transferring, or otherwise interfering with any assets connected to her name. Violating this order will result in immediate arrest. Do you understand? My father started to protest, but Richard grabbed his arm and pulled him back down. My mother was crying openly now, not bothering to maintain any pretense. Jessica sat motionless, staring at nothing. Court was adjourned. I gathered my papers with shaking hands, barely able to process everything that had just happened. As I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, I felt simultaneously lighter and heavier than I'd ever felt before. Lighter because the truth was finally out, because someone had finally stood up for me. Heavier because I now understood the full extent of what my family had done, the decades of calculated abuse and exploitation. I was halfway down the courthouse steps when Luna appeared beside me. Before I could react, she pulled me into a hug that felt like coming home after 20 years of being lost. "I'm so sorry I left you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry it took me this long to come forward. I should have been braver." I held her tightly, crying into her shoulder. "You came back," I managed to say through my tears. "You kept your promise. You helped me." We stood there on the courthouse steps, 2 women who'd been children when their paths first crossed, finally reunited in a moment that felt like justice and healing all at once. "I have so much to tell you," Luna said when we finally pulled apart. "About what I found, about why I waited so long, about the blue notebook your grandmother left for you." My heart stopped. "You found the notebook?" Luna smiled through her tears. "I found everything, Sophia. Your grandmother made sure of it. She knew what they were doing to you, and she made a plan to protect you. She just needed someone she could trust to execute it." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook, blue as the ocean on a clear day. "She gave this to my mother the week before she died. Made her promise to find me when you were old enough to handle the truth.
I took the notebook with trembling hands. On the cover, in my grandmother's familiar handwriting, were the words, "Para Sofía, mi nieta querida, the truth will set you free." 3 weeks after the courthouse revelation, the criminal investigation had uncovered even more evidence than Luna's initial documentation had provided. My parents were facing multiple felony charges, including identity theft, fraud, conspiracy, and, most shocking of all, attempted murder in connection with my brake failure in 2013. The police had reopened that case and discovered security footage from a nearby business that showed my father's car parked near my office building on the night before my accident. Expert analysis of my brake lines confirmed they had been deliberately cut with precision tools. The $1.5 million insurance policy suddenly looked like exactly what it was: a motive for murder. Jessica, facing her own charges for recent financial fraud, had agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. Through her testimony, we learned the full scope of the family's financial crimes, including the discovery that they'd stolen nearly $600,000 from my identity over the years. Money they'd used to maintain their lifestyle, pay for Jessica's failed business ventures, and even purchase a second home in Palm Springs. But perhaps the most important discovery was what Luna and I found in my grandmother's blue notebook. We sat together in my apartment, the Pacific Ocean visible through the windows that my grandmother had somehow known I'd one day look through, and read her final words to me. The notebook contained detailed records of everything she'd observed about my family's treatment of me, dating back to my childhood. She'd documented the emotional abuse, the financial manipulation, the systematic erosion of my self-worth. But more importantly, she'd created a plan to protect me. "Sophia," she'd written on the first page, "if you're reading this, it means Luna found you, and the truth is finally coming out. I've been watching your parents hurt you for years, and I've been documenting everything, waiting for the right moment to act." My grandmother had discovered the bank accounts opened in my name when she'd helped my father with his taxes one year. She'd confronted him about it, demanding he close the accounts and stop using my identity. When he refused and threatened to cut off contact with her entirely, she'd realized she needed a different strategy. "I couldn't expose them while you were still living under their roof," she'd written. "They would have made your life unbearable and found ways to discredit any evidence I provided. But I could gather that evidence and make sure it would surface when you were strong enough to use it." She'd worked with Luna's mother, who had access to family documents through her cleaning work, to copy and preserve everything. When Luna's family was forced to leave, my grandmother had given Luna's mother the notebook and made her promise to find Luna when I was older and help her understand what they'd witnessed. "I'm leaving you my house," the notebook continued, "but I'm doing it in a way your parents can't interfere with. I've placed the property in a trust, with Luna Vasquez as the trustee. She has instructions to transfer it to you when you turn 35, but only if you're living independently from your parents and have shown evidence that you're ready to break free from their control." I looked up from the notebook, staring at Luna in shock. "You've been the trustee of my grandmother's house for 8 years. Luna nodded, tears in her eyes. "I've been managing the property, maintaining it, paying taxes on it, waiting for the right time to contact you. Your grandmother's instructions were very specific. I could only approach you if you were clearly trying to build an independent life, and if your family's actions had escalated to the point where outside intervention was necessary." She smiled. "When I saw the lawsuit, I knew it was time." Your grandmother also left very specific instructions about what evidence to present and how to do it for maximum impact. I flipped through more pages of the notebook, finding records of financial transactions, copies of documents, even photographs my grandmother had taken secretly of my parents discussing their schemes. She'd been building a case against them for years, knowing that eventually they'd go too far and give us the opportunity we needed to expose them. On the final page was a letter addressed directly to me. "My dearest Sophia, by the time you read this, I'll be gone, but my love for you will live on. I've watched you grow into a strong, compassionate, intelligent woman, despite everything your parents have done to try to break your spirit. You were never the problem, mi nieta. You were never ungrateful or difficult or selfish. You were a child who deserved love and protection, and instead, You received manipulation and abuse. I'm sorry I couldn't save you sooner, but I hope this evidence will give you the tools you need to save yourself. The house in Santa Barbara is yours now. Luna will help you claim it. Use it as a sanctuary, a place where you can heal and build the life you've always deserved. And remember that you are loved, deeply, unconditionally, eternally loved by your grandmother, who sees your worth even when others cannot. Be brave, be strong, and never let anyone convince you that you deserve less than complete respect and genuine affection. You are worthy of everything good this life has to offer. Con todo mi amor, abuela. I closed the notebook and sat in silence for a long moment, feeling the presence of my grandmother as if she were sitting right there with us. She'd never stopped fighting for me, never stopped loving me, never stopped believing that someday I'd be strong enough to claim my freedom. 2 months later, I stood in the doorway of my grandmother's house in Santa Barbara, looking out at a garden that had been lovingly maintained in my absence. Luna had hired gardeners to keep it exactly as my grandmother had left it, complete with the jacaranda tree where we used to sit together when I was small. The house was beautiful, a Spanish-style villa with terracotta tiles and arched windows, filled with my grandmother's furniture and photographs and the scent of the lavender she'd planted along the pathways. But more than that, it was a symbol of love that had transcended death, of protection that had waited patiently for the right moment to reveal itself. I'd decided to keep my apartment in Santa Monica and use the Santa Barbara house as a retreat, a place where I could go to remember that I was loved, that I was worthy, that I'd survived something terrible and come through stronger. My parents had both been sentenced to prison, my father to 5 years for fraud and attempted murder, my mother to 3 years for conspiracy and identity theft. Jessica received 2 years of probation and community service in exchange for her cooperation, but she'd also entered a long-term rehabilitation program for gambling addiction and what her therapist called dependent personality disorder. The financial restitution alone had been substantial, nearly $800,000 including interest and damages, but the psychological vindication had been even more valuable. Every bank account had been restored to my name only, my credit had been repaired, and for the first time in my adult life, my financial identity was truly my own. More importantly, I'd used the media attention around my case to start a foundation called Invisible Wounds, dedicated to helping adult children of financially abusive families. The response had been overwhelming. Thousands of people reaching out to share their own stories, seeking resources, asking for help in escaping similar situations. I'd discovered that family financial abuse was far more common than anyone wanted to admit, but it remained largely invisible because victims were taught to feel ashamed, to prioritize family loyalty over their own well-being, to believe that blood relation justified any level of exploitation. Through the foundation, I was helping other people find the courage to seek legal help, set boundaries, and understand that they weren't obligated to financially support people who abused them, even if those people were their parents. 6 months after the trial, on a quiet Sunday morning, I was in my Santa Barbara garden when a car pulled up to the house. I looked up from the roses I'd been planting to see Jessica walking slowly up the path, carrying a small bouquet of flowers. She looked different, thinner, more careful in her movements, but also somehow more present than I'd ever seen her. The performative quality that had defined her my entire life seemed to have been stripped away, leaving behind someone who looked genuinely uncertain and vulnerable. "I brought these for Abuela's grave," she said when she reached the garden gate, holding up the flowers. "I know I don't have the right to ask, but I was wondering if you'd go with me. I have some things I need to say to her, and to you." I studied my sister's face, looking for signs of manipulation or performance, but all I saw was exhaustion, and what might have been genuine remorse. "Why now?" I asked. Jessica's voice was quiet, stripped of the dramatic flair that had always characterized her speech. "Because I'm finally sober, and because I'm finally in therapy that's actually helping instead of just telling me what I want to hear. My therapist says I need to face what I've done, really face it, if I want any chance of becoming someone worth being." She looked at the garden around us, her expression wistful. "Abuela loved you so much, Sophia. Even when we were kids, I knew you were her favorite.
And I hated you for it because I thought it meant I wasn't worthy of love. Mom always said there wasn't enough love to go around, that I had to compete with you for every scrap of affection. Tears were running down her face now, and for the first time in my memory, they seemed completely genuine. I understand now that love isn't a finite resource. Abuela loving you didn't mean she couldn't love me too. But by the time I figured that out, I'd already spent 20 years hurting you because I was afraid. I set down my gardening tools and really looked at my sister. Maybe for the first time seeing her as a fellow victim of our parents' manipulation, rather than just my tormentor. "What do you want from me, Jessica?" "Nothing," she said, and the word came out strong and clear. "I don't want forgiveness because I know I haven't earned it. I don't want absolution because I don't deserve it. I just want to say that I see you now. Really see you. And I understand how badly I failed you as a sister." She took a shaky breath. "I want to tell Abuela that I'm sorry I didn't protect you the way she would have wanted me to. And I want to ask if maybe, someday, when I've proven that I've really changed, you might be willing to let me try to be the sister I should have been all along." I looked at this woman who shared my DNA, but had been a stranger to me my entire life, and I felt something shift inside my chest. Not forgiveness. That would take time and consistent proof of change, but perhaps the beginning of possibility. "I'm going to visit her grave this afternoon," I said finally. "You can come with me. But Jessica, I need you to understand that trust isn't automatically rebuilt because you apologize. It's earned through actions over time, through consistency, through proving that the change is real and permanent." Jessica nodded quickly. "I understand. I'm not asking for trust. I'm asking for a chance to earn it." That afternoon, we drove together to the cemetery where our grandmother was buried. We brought our flowers and sat on the grass beside her headstone, both of us talking to her as if she could hear us. Jessica's apology was raw and unpolished, full of tears and admissions of cruelty that must have been painful to voice. She took responsibility for her actions without deflecting blame or making excuses, acknowledging the years of hurt she'd caused and the ways she'd failed to be the sister our grandmother had hoped she could become. When it was my turn to speak, I told our grandmother about the foundation, about the people I was helping, about how her love and protection had given me the strength to not just survive, but to thrive. I told her about Luna's friendship, about the garden I was restoring, about the peace I was finally learning to feel. As we sat there in the quiet of the afternoon, I felt something I'd never experienced before. The possibility of a real relationship with my sister. Not the twisted, competitive dynamic our parents had forced on us, but something genuine and mutual and based on choice rather than obligation. It wouldn't be easy. It would take years of consistent behavior from Jessica before I could truly trust her. But for the first time, I believed it might be possible for us to heal not just as individuals, but as siblings who'd both been damaged by the same people and who might be able to help each other find wholeness. Looking back now, 2 years after that courtroom victory that changed everything, I can say this with certainty. Saving myself was the hardest and most important thing I've ever done. My parents tried to steal my apartment, but they ended up giving me something far more valuable. The motivation to uncover the truth about who they really were and who I really am. They thought they could break me one final time, but instead, they broke the last chains that bound me to their version of reality. The apartment I fought so hard to keep has become more than just a place to live. It's proof that I survived, that I built something beautiful from the ashes of what they tried to destroy. Every morning when I wake up here, looking out at the Pacific Ocean, I'm reminded that I'm free, truly, completely free, for the first time in my life. The most important lesson I learned through this entire ordeal is that family is not defined by blood alone. Family is defined by love, respect, support, and the choice to stand by each other through difficulties rather than creating those difficulties. My parents gave birth to me, but they never truly loved me. They saw me as a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be cherished. Learning to accept this truth was painful, but it was also liberating, because it gave me permission to build a chosen family from people who actually see my worth. Luna and I have become closer than sisters, bonded by shared experience and mutual respect. The foundation we started together has helped over 400 families in 2 years, providing legal aid, counseling resources, and most importantly, validation that what they're experiencing is real and wrong and not their fault. I speak at conferences now, sharing my story not for sympathy but for education. Every time I tell an audience about family financial abuse, someone comes up afterward to thank me for helping them understand their own situation, for giving them the courage to seek help, for showing them that survival and thriving are possible. My apartment may have been what my parents tried to steal, but my voice is what I truly reclaimed. And I'm using that voice to make sure other people know they're not alone, they're not crazy, and they're not obligated to accept abuse just because it comes from people who share their DNA. If you're watching this, and you recognize yourself in my story, if you've been financially exploited by your family members, if you've been made to feel guilty for wanting basic respect and boundaries, please hear me when I say this. You are not alone. You are not ungrateful. You are not the problem. You deserve safety. You deserve dignity. You deserve to keep what you earn and build what you create without having it stolen by people who claim to love you while treating you like an ATM machine. Family is supposed to be a source of support and protection, not exploitation and harm. And if your family can't or won't provide that, you have every right to limit contact, set boundaries, or even cut ties completely while you build a new support system with people who actually care about your well-being. Your freedom is worth fighting for. Your peace is worth protecting. Your life is worth living on your own terms, not according to someone else's selfish agenda. So if my story has resonated with you, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. I share resources, expert interviews, and stories from other survivors regularly. This community has become a lifeline for thousands of people who are fighting their own battles against family financial abuse. More importantly, I want to hear from you in the comments below. Tell me, has anyone in your family ever exploited you financially or emotionally? Have you ever felt guilty for setting boundaries with relatives who claimed to love you but treated you terribly? What's one thing you wish you could say to your family but have never had the courage to speak aloud? Your story matters. Your experience matters. And sharing it here, even anonymously, might be the thing that helps someone else realize they're not alone in their struggle. And if you know someone who might be going through something similar, please share this video with them. You might be giving them the permission they need to finally recognize that what's happening to them is abuse, that they deserve better, that fighting back is not only possible but necessary. Remember, the family you save might be yourself, and that's not selfish. That's survival. That's strength. That's love. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this community. And thank you for choosing to see the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it challenges everything you've been taught about family loyalty and obligation. You can find resources in the description below, including the Invisible Wounds Foundation's website and 24-hour helpline. You don't have to fight alone. We're here, and we believe you. Until next time, take care of yourself, because you're worth it.